Hello everyone and welcome to Invest Midlands. I'm Alex Turner from the business desk and I'll be hosting the first part of the conference this morning. This is the second year that we've held Invest Midlands, also the second year we've held it online as COVID and Omicron and various other strains continue to cause a little bit of disruption. But last week we were able to hold an Invest Midlands dinner in person, which I think really showed people's appetite to get back out there. And there was plenty of optimism in the room about the year ahead. I mean, there is such momentum across the region, and Invest Midlands is all about capturing that spirit of excitement and possibility. It's about putting the spotlight on the opportunities in the areas where we can expect to see positive change. I mean, we're already seeing lots of momentum from Coventry's Year of City of Culture, Birmingham getting ready to welcome all the guests for the Commonwealth Games this summer. HS2 and the associated jobs and economic investment have already begun to arrive, while cranes and developments continue to change our cities. If you haven't been to Birmingham or Nottingham since before times, you'll see an awful lot of things are different on the skyline. Today is also about answering the what's next question and finding an answer to not only how do we do it, but how do we do it differently. Net zero, 5G and AI are all going to be central to our post-pandemic recovery, as are those things that aren't directly measured by GDP figures or FDI stats. It's about what we can all do collectively and collaboratively to help each other grow our businesses and strengthen our communities so that the Midlands continues to be a great place to work and live. That's what Invest Midlands is about today. Just before we get started in earnest, a few thank yous. I'd like to thank our sponsors and partners for today's conference at the University of Birmingham, BECG, Phoenix Group and Millennium Point. Thank you very much for your support today. It's very much appreciated. And thank you to you for joining us today. We really want you to get involved. So do make sure you join in the session chat and the event chat, in the networking, ask questions of the panelists in the sessions that you watch, and go and speak to people in the expo area. Really get involved as much as you can throughout the day. Okay. Let's get started. Our first theme of today, Invest Midlands, is place. Place really is looking at how regeneration is all about connection. Connecting homes to workplaces, the future of places to their heritage, the first phase to the final vision. The purpose of place has become a central theme in the post-pandemic recovery. And we're going to start talking about the future of our cities. This session is sponsored by Phoenix Group, and we're going to look at how cities are always evolving, but the pandemic has created significant disruption that has made room for a real debate about how we want to shape our cities for the next generation. I'm delighted to welcome Sajida Rose, Corporate Director for Growth and City Development at Nottingham City Council, Tom Sumster, Head of Private Markets from Phoenix Group, and Anthony Breach, Senior Analyst, Centre for Cities. Thank you all for joining us this morning. Let's jump straight in. If I could start with you, Sajida. Cities have always been evolving, but the pandemic has accelerated a lot of our thinking. Where is Nottingham up to, and how has your thinking perhaps changed over the last couple of years?
So good morning, Alex, and good morning, colleagues. You're quite right. The pandemic has accelerated probably some trends that were already there. I think the retail decline and shift to online is the obvious one. And in our case in Nottingham, that shift, and in particular the acceleration in terms of the impact of COVID, meant the decline of the major shopping centre that we had at the heart of the city centre that was intended for major redevelopment, unfortunately, who were the lead developer, went into administration. The consequence of that has meant that the City Council inherited a 1970s shopping centre in need of major redevelopment and investment. So on the one hand, yes, a challenge, but actually a real opportunity for us as a city to rethink the role of the city centre, rethink the role of retail, and redefine it on the basis of the future. So building in a more mixed-use development, looking at how you bring people into the city, how the city connects to the heart of the conurbations surrounding it, and looking at how you create a sense, build on the urban renaissance that had been started in the 90s, redevelop on the basis of quality public space, bringing people back into the city and exploring how we do that. So we've led, in particular, a big conversation. We something that is potentially a disaster, we've looked to see how can we turn that around to being an opportunity that reshapes and redefines not just Nottingham, but forms the blueprint for redefining cities in a post-COVID world. So that, we have a vision. We're looking at how we develop that, how we retain the best of Nottingham and connect it to its heritage, but rethinking it in terms of its mixed use, bringing back in more residential, but also experiential retail. I don't think retail is dead. I think it's different retail. And I think occupancy is starting to increase and footfall is. So in my view, and as a champion for a core city in Nottingham, I think cities are at the heart of reviving regional economies, and our role as part of that is key. So I'll stop there and hand back to you, Alex.
Yeah, great, thanks. And Tom, you were nodding along there at the opportunity point. Has the pandemic, by sort of pressing the pause button, meant that people have been more able to think about the long term and say, well, and ask the question, what are we doing and what is it that we actually want to do?
Okay, yeah, good morning, everybody. I think the pandemic certainly brought up a few themes and accelerated the way people are thinking about investing going forwards. I mean, certainly, I guess conferences like this would have been face-to-face before, and we've now learned how to work online, and working from home, flexible working has been much more prevalent. And in fact, rather than seeing FaceTime in offices now, people are able to spend more time with their families. Commuter times have reduced, and I think there's been potentially a better way of living. The reason I was nodding to Sajida is, that 1970s redevelopment and the way that she explained how they're thinking about changing perhaps, some of the use of that particular landmass is music to my ears as a private investor, wanting to help support local city councils and regional initiatives. We sit here at at Phoenix Group. Sorry, that was my previous employer, at Phoenix Group, with 300 billion of assets under management, and a real desire to deploy around 40 to 50 billion over the coming years into sustainable investing. Cities are absolutely crucial to that, and changing the way that people move around those cities, recognizing that the energy use through the zero carbon initiatives that are occurring at the moment is absolutely crucial. And of course, then, where do people live, and how do those houses function, and can we bring more affordable housing into those cities? So, the real change in the ecosystem in the way that people will be living, working, and enjoying life going forwards. And we're very focused on, improving communities' lives, improving people's way of living, and using what I would describe as our pension fund capital to sit there alongside the taxpayer, who in essence is the same person at a different point in their lifetime, and create a different partnership with the public sector, which is far more flexible, that looks at different ways in which we can invest through perhaps VC development capital, through to very stable investments where there are strong cash flows over the longer term. And I think that sort of partnership where we put the people at the core of our investments. Certainly when we make investments, we look at social value just as much as we do economic value. It's hugely important that our money stands for the social side. And I'm just really, really excited about the future cities that we can, have a real strong, big part to play in, as we talk to city mayors and the likes of Sajida and others, as we think around, the devolution that's happening in this country at the moment, the focus on levelling up. I sit here in London, and I'm as guilty as anybody else for not having taken the rest of the country more seriously in the past. And, it's a big problem now, and we need to invest and level up, and sooner rather than later.
Yes, and it will be interesting how that discussion develops. I think it was notable how little levelling up got mentioned in the spring statement earlier in the week, but I think it's certainly been driven very hard by the regions. Anthony, if I could bring you in, have cities of the UK quite worked out what they want to be going forward now, or is that still very much in flux?
Yeah, I think that's it's kind of a broad question. I think that, as Sajida was saying, like quite a few trends that existed before the pandemic have been accelerated. So, for instance, there's kind of ideas around flexible working from home. We're already starting to see people maybe talking about a 4-day week or a 4.5-day week beforehand. That might continue into the future. I think from where we stand at Centre for Cities, we think of cities as labour markets. People move to cities to get a job, and kind of long-term trend we've seen certainly since 1980s is that urban economies have become increasingly important to the national economy, and the way in which city centres, in particular, can serve as places in which people meet, they share ideas, firms can find highly skilled employers, and highly productive work that supports the rest of the local economy takes place. I think is a trend that's going to continue. And even if we do have more flexible working and more kind of Zoom conferences and at-home working, that can result in conversations like this. I think there's still going to be a role for that kind of special kind of face-to-face interaction that we see, which supports innovation, which supports kind of career progression, especially for younger people, skills acquisition, and leads to new relationships. And the best place for those interactions to happen is city centres. So she's totally right that we need to be thinking about moving away from kind of, in most places, kind of an over-reliance on retail. There was a large excess of retail space before the pandemic, and shifting away from that kind of older model towards one which is more based around kind of innovative work towards production. It is going to be, I think, kind of a long-term trend that we're going to see coming out of the pandemic. And I think kind of one interesting thing that I think it's not got quite as much attention as I think it deserves is actually the government introduced a reform back in 2020, and it then spent quite a while going through the courts, so we haven't heard that much about it yet. That has been the commercial use class reform that has merged a whole bunch of use classes, retail, offices, restaurants, gyms, all sorts, into a single commercial use class. So now occupiers and landlords can switch between those as much as we want. And as we come out of the pandemic, that new flexibility, I think, is going to be really important for cities and also for firms as well.
Yeah, I think that's made the sort of adaptability of space much easier than perhaps it was. I think a couple of you have mentioned around sustainability and net zero, and I think that's really at the heart of lots of conversations about the future, particularly around development. So Sajida, what's Nottingham doing, and how are you addressing the net zero agenda?
So in Nottingham, we have an ambition to be the first city, I think the first European city, to reach net zero by 2028. So we have what we call our CN28, which is a target to reach there, accelerating the 2050 UK target. But also, if we get there, we'll be the first city in Europe to reach that target. So on the back of that, we've got broad plans across sustainable transport, decarbonising our social housing stock, working with our core and key employers to look at how we reduce their emissions. And there's a whole range of initiatives that we're undertaking and I believe leading the way. So particularly in the context of sustainable transport, we have one of the largest and most integrated public transport systems outside of London. And recently, I had a House of Lords visit on the back of that, recognising how integrated and how sustainable it is to provide that longer term commitment to decarbonising, given that transport is one of the biggest emitters of carbon within the city. So there's a lot of work underway already, and we're integrating that in terms of how we build new housing. So looking at future design schemes. We've just recently agreed a new affordable housing scheme that exceeds the carbon targets. So leading the way in terms of not just existing housing stock and how we decarbonise that, which is a significant challenge. It will cost millions and billions to decarbonise all of our housing stock, but we're looking at innovative ways of doing that, but also encouraging employers and future investors to embed sustainability at the heart of any new development. So for us, it's a key part of our ambitious plans for revitalising the city.
Yeah, I was going to say it's interesting. I think sometimes overlooked that when particularly northern cities spend a lot of time talking about trams, Nottingham were able to actually build in a really successful network and is now on to the next thing, the scooters that are throughout the city, but actually that continual thing of what's next? How do we make it work in our city? And it seems like Nottingham's ahead of most other cities in the UK at the moment on that.
Yeah, we like to think so. And as you say, so we're currently trialing the e-scooters, and they're Marmite. Some people like them, some people don't. But actually, it's looking at alternative forms of movement in a sustainable way, recognizing the diverse needs of the city. Not all people will use buses or trams. You need to think about how you utilize different mechanisms that allow people to move, but in a sustainable way. So we're trialing e-scooters at the moment. We're looking at all of our EV infrastructure. We've done various trials of encouraging hybrid taxis, for example. So there's lots of innovative stuff underway, and really pleased and proud to lead the way and working with our colleagues across the Midlands in terms of embedding and sharing some of that learning. And as you say, the tram system, we were lucky that we got that underway when we did, but it's a fantastic asset. It allows connectivity in a very tight city and reduces the congestion as a result of having, an infrastructure that people can reliably use.
Yeah. And Tom, from an investor's perspective, I think ESG credentials have accelerated up the priority list. But where you're thinking at the moment in terms of what you expect to see
from an ESG perspective, Alex?
Yes, and from whether it's cities or private sector projects about taking on board environmental concerns.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm speaking on behalf of most investors out there. We would love to be impact investors. That is, only doing things that are ESG and right at the at the sort of renewables end of that. But of course, we are going through a transition, and that will take a number of years. So how can we support that as a financial investor? Well, that is by making sure that there are certain performance measures so that we can see the change in the way that industry and that various projects, start considering how they reduce their carbon footprint across the world as they continue on their own transition going forward. So, when we're making investments, very much within sort of the contractual agreement that we go into, there will be certain information covenants that people will be required to produce to us, which is purely focused on ESG and demonstrating that their own company or their own particular asset is in fact reducing that carbon footprint over time. And that's really important to us. When we go into all of our investment committees now, ESG is a big credit and investment risk now. We need to ensure that we're not investing in, let's say, carbon bad investments, because over the course of 10 or 15 years, they will be seen as bad investments that, and those companies may not be around at that point in time. So, it's equally as important as we think about that economic return, that we think about the social value, we think about the environment, also that, that there is good governance around the investments that we make, that we believe in the people. It is about the partnership, that we understand who we're investing with, and it's far more hands-on than perhaps it ever was before, where perhaps financial investors were quietly sitting in the background, obtaining a return. These days, we want to be far more proactive. We want to shout about the good investments we make, and we want to be proud of the people that we back and the people that we partner with. So I can't underline how much ESG has a huge impact on the way that we think about our investments going forwards, given the type of capital that we look after.
Yeah, Anthony, from a political point of view, if we go back to 9 or 12 months, and we were starting the build up to COP, and it felt like there was a very sort of unified view on the direction of travel, and then post COP, and with economic concerns sort of coming more to the fore, there seems to be pushback from certain parts. Are we in a position where we still need to make the case for net zero, or is that debate won, do you think?
So I think that there's still probably a consent. I mean, this is a little bit outside my wheelhouse, but I think probably the objective of net zero is, I think there's still a consensus around that. As you said, there's been some debate on the fringes, but I think, when we're speaking to people in local authorities, journalists and national governments, there's still a consensus around this. The Climate Change Committee, is set out, what the path to net zero is, kind of what our carbon budgets are, and how we're spending them. Where I think kind of the political challenge is in the technical details of how we actually get to net zero, and partly that's about disruptive changes, which I think people are increasingly familiar with. The shift from internal combustion engines to electric vehicles is kind of one such example. There's then implications around how you do charging for those vehicles. But I think this is the more kind of difficult challenge is sort of the more disruptive things even than that. So what's kind of striking though about kind of some of those more difficult challenges, I think especially for cities and for local authorities, is that in some of those more difficult areas, there's not necessarily the same trade-off between economic growth and economic prosperity and tackling carbon emissions as there might be for some of these other sort of more more basic or sort of more fundamental changes between shifting our energy use, for example. So at Centre for Cities, kind of one of the things we've been really interested in is looking at what the role is for cities in reaching net zero. So what is the economic role that cities can play? And the interesting thing is that when you look at what are sort of the economic characteristics of our cities, we see density is really important. We see having lots of people concentrated in a particular area is important. But we also see that our big cities really underperform compared to what the national average is, compared to their peers in other countries. And there's unfilled potential there, and that's partly to do with the lack of density that our cities outside London have. But interestingly, the increasing density and increasing sort of the amount of people within a certain area actually reduces the per person carbon emissions of the people who live in that city, because you make public transport more viable, you make cycling and walking more viable. You also kind of with new buildings, or flats, etc. You have lower kind of building emissions. And so there's this kind of element in which actually fixing the density question within cities both tackles the economic levelling up problem that we have, but it also helps tackle some of the kind of transport challenges that we have and kind of carbon challenges we have as well. Now, fixing those two problems at the same time, killing those two birds with one stone, that's going to require quite difficult changes to our built environment. So that's going to require difficult conversations with the public about going from terraced and semi-detached housing up to maybe 4 or 5 stories in parts of our urban areas. But it also means, I think, changes for local authorities, changes to how kind of the planning system works. I think in some cases, relaxing control a little bit and sort of accepting a more rules-based planning system like we see in other parts of the world. But I think from an economic perspective, I think there's great opportunity for places to both level up and to reduce their carbon emissions, but it does require difficult political challenges for both the public and also for cities as well.
Absolutely. So Sajida, the sort of tension between, I suppose, if we can put it very unnuanced, in a very unnuanced way, the private sector wanting to work very fast with very light touch regulation, and councils and governments wanting to make sure the right frameworks in place to make sure that everything works in the long term. How do you balance that, given the desire to accelerate progress, and as Anthony mentioned, there's so many different competing factors?
For me, it's about good partnership. We have a record of 100% planning applications recommended by officers, approved by our planning committee. That takes good collaboration and good work on the basis of that. Setting, firstly, I think recognizing that local authorities and cities in particular have a role in setting place leadership and a vision for the city that they're responsible for, but then working with their partners, working with their developers and investors to enable that to happen. So having the infrastructure in place, having clarity around the levels of what will be acceptable in terms of density, high rise or not, principles around sustainability, and being clear. From our conversations with developers, it's the lack of clarity that affects the delivery timeframe, not the planning system. I think sometimes it's a bit of an excuse that planning systems don't work. They do work if they're managed well, and if underpinned by good relationships and good conversations. You're very welcome to our city, and I'm sure we'd have different views sometimes, but by and large, most of our developers will say we're a pro-growth city, pro-development, and we work hard to have that relationship with our investors and developers to enable good growth. But equally, we do have a commitment and a desire as custodians of the city for good urban design, good sustainable development, and development that puts people at the heart of it. So recognizing how you make that, all of that come together and working together to achieve that. Because in reality, local authorities, public sector, private sector, we have to work together. there is a space for collaboration, and I think within cities, particularly around development, that's where we're coming together. You achieve the outcomes that actually that work for developers, because they need that confidence to be able to operate in a place where you see that commitment from the public sector being there, but equally from the public sector. I mean, one of the points that Anthony made earlier with regards to density, the other point he also addresses acute challenges around housing delivery. You know, density is part of the response in cities like ours that's very bounded with, and you know, no space for growth, and therefore one of the only answers is to actually increase density. It addresses sustainability. There's economic outcomes, but also it delivers housing challenges.
Tom, in your experience, what is the difference between the good cities and the bad cities in terms of that partnership working, and what is it that you're looking for when you start your conversations?
Yeah, I mean, I'd probably say there's no bad cities out there. There may be cities with challenges, but I think the cities that are really enabling a forward vision for people of those cities are cities that have a shared vision going forwards, that, you know, have perhaps city mayors. So if you think about Andy Street in the Midlands, you know, hugely progressive individual, very, very keen now with potential devolution from central government to really enable investment into, you know, the whole of the Midlands area, which is really exciting for investors like ourselves, where we can get involved in very, very different partnerships, where there are much more flexible contracts and can invest across the risk curve, so to speak. So we can get in early and develop. You know, it can even be, you know, financing certain university initiatives that are out there for new companies that have come out of some research at a particular university to a very large infrastructure project such as High Speed 2. And being able to understand the sort of 10 to 15 year vision for a city in that region, and being able to talk to people like Sajida around ways in which we can play a part. You know, the public purse can only go so far. There's finite in resource, and I sit here in an asset manager wanting to deploy 40-50 billion across the UK over the next few years. So
come to Nottingham.
Pardon?
Come to Nottingham.
Absolutely, would be delighted. So I'll certainly take you up on that invite, Sajida. And just to work out really, you know, what is the vision, and speaking to people like Sajida, you know, around the sort of the detail over the next 10 to 15 years. What is that city excited about, and how can we enable and accelerate that investment because of the, you know, the capital that we can bring? We're very much long-term investors, buy and hold, and I think it's a really exciting time for you know, new collaboration.
Absolutely. You've preempted my final question. Very, very conscious of time. So in about 30 seconds each, and I'll start with you, Anthony. What are you most excited about, you know, perhaps for the year ahead or longer term around the future of our cities?
I think the most exciting thing coming around the corner is how the metro mayor deals, or kind of the county deals, are going to be rolled out, with potentially more metro mayors kind of springing up across the country. There's definitely this approach where, you know, if places are prepared to put some skin in the game, I think like Nottingham City Council did with the workplace parking levy and using that to fund their extensive tram system, places that are prepared to absorb political risk will get more powers, they'll have more control over their own resources, and they'll be able to partner with, you know, with organisations like Tom's to get growth going in their city.
Great. Tom?
Yeah, I'm just really keen to see, and a little bit like Anthony just said, you know, the new metro mayors and the city visions that they bring, you know, the way in which we can create much more flexible, innovative partnerships that will be lasting. And as risks change over the longer term, we don't go to contracts, we go to our partners and we work out, you know, how to adjust those returns so that the private sector is no longer making excessive profits. It is making a reasonable return for a reasonable risk, and it's putting the people at the forefront. So that city vision, you know, is key to allowing perhaps the private sector to then innovate around that and provide a healthy partnership going forwards.
Great. And the final word to you, Sajida.
Thank you, Alex. And just on that, in terms of devolution, we haven't had a chance to talk about that today, but we within the East Midlands are also pursuing early stage conversations around a combined authority with an elected mayor, building on what other cities and regions have done. And we agree that potentially offers the opportunity, providing that confidence for investment. And I think my hope and aspiration for our city is realising our vision for creating a city that brings and connects to people. So economic gain, economic return, revival of cities, urban renaissance, but putting people at the heart of it. So creating social value and dealing with some of our social challenges, which we have within an urban city, as you would expect. So economic return, but with social value at the heart of it.
Well, that's great. Well, thank you very much, Sajida, Tom and Anthony, for your contributions. I think a lot for us to think about, a great start to Invest Midlands and some of the themes that we will explore throughout the day. So thank you very much for joining us. And I will see you on the other side of the sting for our next session on connected transport. I think plenty of the things we will discuss throughout today will, slightly overlap and feed into each other. And I think transport being at the very heart of the future of our cities is one such example. So it's good planning that we move straight into our session on connected super regions and how infrastructure investment can really transform economic growth across the Midlands. The transport sector has had a challenging pandemic in all sorts of ways, and there's been a great deal of uncertainty about its recovery. But there's an awful lot of long-term projects, not least in the Midlands HS2, that will be transformational across the next generation and beyond. So I'm delighted to welcome our panel. Lorna Pimlett is the Phase 2 Sponsorship Director at HS2. Sarah Spinks, the Strategic Partnership Lead at the Midlands Engine, and Kevin Whitmore, Director for the Head of North and Midlands at BECG, who are sponsoring this session today. Welcome all. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Alex.
Sarah, if I could start with you, as we on the cusp of hopefully spring is just about here, 2022. How is this year looking in terms of a return to our roads, rail, airport, and getting, I suppose, the use of transport back to somewhere where it used to be?
Thanks, Alex. Firstly, I'm Midlands Connect. I'm not Midlands Engine, so I'm much more dealing with the transport than the engine would be.
Yes. Sorry.
And again, Connect is there to think about this sort of long term. So yes, we're starting to see bus numbers, rail numbers coming back. But do we really want it to come back in the same way it was before? And I think that's probably a discussion for you to have with the operators. What we're here to do is actually make sure that those long-term plans are in place so that we have that connectivity going forward across the region. We also want to make sure that, as I say, we're seeing, and as I say, this is not necessarily my area of expertise, but the way people are coming back is different. There's a lot more travel for leisure, not as many commuters. So our rail company is going to start wanting to do their maintenance during normal commuting time. We need to look where the demand is and how it's coming back. And we don't want to go back to those 1 hour peak commuter trains. How do we make people, we're working smarter now. How do we even that out to really make the best of the resources and the facilities that are already in place?
And how has the last couple of years changed the thinking of Midlands Connect around longer term plans?
Well, in fairness, our strategy came out in March 2017, which basically sort of said these are the priorities that the region needs to increase its productivity. This is the infrastructure we need to increase productivity. And about 2 years ago now, so before two and a bit years ago, before the pandemic started, we'd already said, right, we've done a lot of this. How do we move forward? How do we change the direction of the organisation? And we've now got 3 core objectives. And the new plan is out on April the 4th. Just get that one in there. And really, it's about, we've still got that economic slant, but it's about resilience. How do we have that economic resilience? We're still talking a lot more now about, are we investing in the right place? Aligning with that whole levelling up, making the investment fairer. Things like HS2, you're right, fantastic. But how do we make sure that benefits the whole region, not just the area with stations. And then finally, the decarbonisation and the green agenda now runs through all 49 of our work streams. I think when we had the first plan came out, we had 17 work streams. We've now got 49. So it factors massively. And, we, as sort of funded by the DFT, so we want to make sure that some of the ideas, some of the plans they have can be put into place within the Midlands region. And not just DFT, we want to sort of make sure that we're getting, with the funding streams that come from BEIS or from other government departments, that we can tap in and, use them, because transport is an enabler. We don't just build concrete and railways because we like them. We build them so that people can get to places and, travel and improve their own sort of chances and opportunities.
Yeah. Kevin, transport use, feels like a key indicator of confidence in many ways. And, Sarah mentioned about we're seeing much greater leisure travel than perhaps during the week. Are you seeing the appetite from the business community return for that face-to-face interaction and to get around the country once more?
I think there absolutely is. We're doing so much more face-to-face than we were even 3 or 4 months ago. And certainly my own sort of travel patterns and experiences of being sat on the train in and out of Birmingham and elsewhere, demonstrates that uptake is there. Whilst platforms like this are fantastic to cut down on our carbon and to broaden the conversation, there's still lots of conversations where you do want to get around the table, look each other in the eye and say, are we actually going to do this? So I think there's an appetite to get back and do more face-to-face, but we've got the tech these days that we didn't have 2 years ago to do stuff like this, so we're never going to go back, I don't think, completely to the way that we were. But also, I benefit from a flexi season ticket, now where I can get on the train a bit less frequently, and the operators are recognising that in terms of the products that they're offering the commuters too. So, I think, with the appetite's there. I'm sure it will get busier, but different days have different, busyness, I suppose. We were talking just before this, and Lorna's sat in the office in a very empty office today, I think, because perhaps people don't want to commute on a Friday, and particularly a sunny Friday. So different patterns, but certainly I see more and more demand from the private sector to be getting around the table and talking face to face.
And Lorna, while obviously HS2 doesn't have any passengers yet, I think if people aren't near a route or haven't been around Curzon Street in Birmingham for the last couple of years, they won't understand just how much progress has been made and just how far through into the delivery phase we are at the moment. And 2022 is another big year of delivery for the project. So do you just want to bring people up to speed on where we're up to and what they can expect to see?
Yeah, of course. So a couple of things there, really. So it's really good that for the sort of in the last couple of months now, we've actually got 3 live phases of HS2, first time ever. So as you've referenced, so phase 1 is well into construction. It's got circa 350 sites. We've got 16,000 people working on HS2 directly now. And many thousands of, in fact, over 2,000 businesses have contracts with HS2. And going back to Sarah's point about economic recovery, we are absolutely central to assisting and supporting the country's recovery. We've got circa 10% of all jobs in the UK are in the construction industry. So our phase 1 and having its main work civil contracts, of which we've probably awarded more than 12 billion now in the market. And of those contracts, circa 95% are UK based. So that, we are really getting the return to our businesses, to Kevin's point. Phase 2A got its royal assent last year, and it's transitioning into that construction. So 2A takes us basically from just above Birmingham up to Crewe. And we've now got the 2B western leg, so Crewe to Manchester. We deposited that in Parliament in January. So really, for the first time since the Okavé review, we really are all guns now, which is great, because we've had a bit of a checkered history, I think, in HS2 with regards to certainty. And again, going back to my point on the market, the construction industry absolutely needs certainty. It wants to employ and give people careers, and you can't do that without certainty. And I mean, we have had that challenge previously as well within the organization. So I think, although we may not be in service yet, we are absolutely contributing to that recovery, and we are also at the leading edge of the sort of carbon reduction, leading the market innovation of how we can reduce the carbon within construction. Because what we also recognize is, over a 120-year period, the first 10 to 15 years have 95% of our carbon. So that's in construction, that's concrete, that's steel. And as an organization, we have committed now to reduce our carbon emissions by 50% by 2030. And in fact, we've already achieved 25% of that today. And some of that is, stations design and other aspects, which, we can maybe cover later. But yeah, we have a real contribution to make. But the main message, really is for the country, this is happening, the momentum is coming. And with that, will be the jobs, the growth strategies that can develop new housing and opportunities for business in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. And Sarah, I think transport plays such an important role in economic growth, not just at that kind of macro level, but connecting communities with the jobs. So whether that's through tram networks or new roads and the like. So how do you balance the competing priorities of, for example, connecting those suburbs or those less well-connected areas of the region alongside perhaps some of the bigger projects that you might have?
And this is why I have a job. We have 22 local authorities, 9 LEPs and 8 chambers of commerce. You can imagine the demands in rural Lincolnshire are completely different to those in the middle of Coventry. How do we get people in Leicestershire excited about a project that we want to put forward in Worcestershire? And that's where we used to use a phrase, so you may not get the concrete poured in your area, but you should get the benefit. You should get some benefits. It's how when we work as a region, we can have a stronger voice, and that's key. We have a program called the Major Road Network, which is essentially looking at roads that have strategic economic importance, but they're not looked after by national highways. And this can be a road in Lincolnshire that has huge amounts of HGVs because it's bringing food products to the main network, or it could be a road in Herefordshire that has no alternatives. But just because they haven't got huge demand that you might have on a suburban road in Birmingham, it doesn't mean they're not important. And it's trying to make these roads and these schemes pushed up that national agenda and say, look, this may just look like a roundabout that needs improving, but actually it's key to this whole connected route that goes from Tewkesbury all the way up to the Humber ports, the A46. That's a key road. And it has, when Midlands Connect started, we asked the local authorities what their priorities were, and everybody had a plan for this road. I think Evesham needed a bypass to increase business attractivity. Coventry had a few junction issues. Leicestershire needed access to more housing. Lincolnshire wanted to get up to the ports. But actually, when you put this together, this route, had businesses that comprised sort of 9% of England's GVA. It was huge, but we're just not using it right. So how do we make sure that the facilities that go into place are then used in the right way? This, it's port to port almost. It's sort of almost Bristol up to the Humber. So you've got to make sure that you're making the region think as a whole. You're making local schemes have maybe regional and national significance, but then also on the flip side of that, you've got government projects and you're saying, right, well, how can these be applied in the region? And I think it's that collaborative working that just makes the voice stronger. And, government are quite happy to listen to a collective rather than lots of individual voices, because it's stronger. And once we've got not only the local authority endorsements, you bring in the business views and the political views, all of a sudden you've got a voice they can't not hear.
Yeah, and I suppose one of the challenges with transport projects is, people are very quick to spot when it doesn't work, but don't understand how it does work. And you mentioned, sort of a roundabout can make a huge difference. How have you found getting that sort of cohesion and that coherent voice?
It can be tricky at times. It's fair to say different board members have different priorities. I mean, you look at something as, well, I say as simple. Sir Peter Hendy in the Union Connectivity Review, he's saying this is great. We need better connections into Wales. We need better connections up to Scotland. Great. We've been working with the Marches LEP, with Shropshire and Herefordshire and the Welsh Government. However, how do you work on a scheme that goes over both sides? Mm-hmm. For National Highways, it's a very small project. For the Welsh Government, well, it's not all in our patch. The Welsh Government and National Highways have got very different opinions on how to progress with road schemes. So something as simple as working on a cross-border programme takes quite a lot of discussion. And again, sometimes getting that political involvement. And you have to have, I mean, there's three things that I think you need to push anything forward. And that's a good business case. You have to have the evidence, industry support and political support. And, sometimes you need the evidence to get the latter two, but sometimes you can get the political support and then you have to get the evidence. But getting those things together is when you've then got a good scheme. And I think by saying to all of our partners, these are the criteria that we're looking at, it then helps, right? Well, these are now the schemes that fulfill that criteria. So it's getting their buy-in early so that they know some of their projects may not make the list, but they also know that our list is not the only way to get things. There are other ways of getting things. It's just that's not necessarily sort of something that would come through us.
Yeah. And Kevin, what's the role of business in being part of these conversations, sometimes making the case more strongly for the benefits of schemes? Where does business fit in?
Well, I think sort of Sarah spelled out quite clearly what the role of business should be in making the case for some of these projects, and certainly the work that we do across the region is often trying to work with LEPs and local authorities to say, look, this is the opportunity we're trying to deliver here that can support priority X or Y that you're already trying to promote either nationally or across the region. And I think as devolution deepens hopefully over the next few years, and I think perhaps one of the issues that perhaps is holding some of these conversations back in the Midlands is the fact that you've got a very strong and high profile mayor in the West Midlands, but nothing quite yet of a similar ilk in the East Midlands. Is that if we can sort of complete that patch, fulfill that patchwork across the region of strong sort of central flag wavers that can then be working together, it's then for business to stand behind that and say actually what he or she's saying is right, and if we don't get it, then UK PLC is not going to benefit in the way that national government wants it to be. So I think business get that, and I think over the past certainly in the 10 years of my career, businesses are more willing to stick their elbows out and align themselves behind organisations like Midlands Connect or HS2 to say actually if we don't do this, guys, there's going to be real problems in the future. And in my experience, Midlands Connect, local authorities, they very much welcome that contribution from business.
No, absolutely. And if I could just come back to a theme, Lorna, that you started talk about sustainability, which is very, very important, and is much more detailed than merely let's get everybody out of their cars, So, what role do HS2 have? And you touched very briefly on the carbon reduction strategy you have in place. So just tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, okay. So we launched our environmental sustainability report in the autumn last year. And that was really in recognition to my earlier point that in the construction industry, we really need to show that we're at the leading edge of working with businesses and working with research and partnerships to get the most innovation we can to deliver the long-term HS2 project. And this goes back to the fact that, we recognize that a huge amount of carbon is emitted within our construction. And actually going forward, that's simply unacceptable. And therefore, we need to be looking and working on ways of reducing that. We also recognise that the disruption that we bring to in and around our sites is huge for sort of day-to-day businesses and homeowners. And therefore, looking at how we do our mass haul, looking at all of our sort of transport strategies around our sites and making sure that we reduce those as much as we can. And it really aligns to the fact that the purpose of HS2, yes, we will end up with a railway, but it's a much bigger opportunity than just building a railway. And we recognize that. And we have to show that we are massively contributing to getting cars off roads, getting lorries off roads, making sure that there is more opportunity for freight on our services, which to date, is increasingly being challenged. And that is a key element of really the strategy of HS2 and being able to link up our cities, and for commuters or holiday makers or business trips to be able to get from city to city almost in a comparable time from airports, and actually massively reducing the emissions by doing that. I think the other thing, other than within construction, one of the areas that we're focusing on is the design of the stations themselves. So we obviously will have a Euston station, an Old Oak station, an interchange station, and a Curzon Street station in phase 1 alone. And as I say, what we've managed to do in the Curzon Street, for example, is we've now got 0 emissions. So we're using, completely sourced energy. We're not coming off the grid for that at all. So 0 emissions from that. And we're also making sure that as we design our stations, we are working with industry to make sure we're leading edge. And I think the combination of when we're in construction, the buildings that we will leave as a legacy from HS2 and their demand on the grid and other sources going forward is a key contribution that we have to make. I would say, for me, the point of HS2 is very much the 3 C's. So connectivity, we've all had many discussions around that, connecting our cities. Capacity, but carbon reduction absolutely has to be up there, just to Sarah's earlier points. And, that's within our KPIs now. So as an organization, we are absolutely committed to making sure that we deliver on these targets.
Yeah. And Sarah, the net zero agenda, carbon reduction has become such an important topic in a relatively short period of time, really. How is that changed thinking at Midlands Connect, and how have you adapted to what people now expect?
I mean, the first thing is actually making sure people, and I'm not lecturing anyone here, understand the difference between carbon and air quality. There's a lot of people who think that's all right. We're putting in lots of active travel, lots of cycle and walking schemes. That's great. That will have a massive impact on health, on air quality, on placemaking. But for carbon, you need to have an impact on those longer journeys. It needs to be focused on those freight journeys as well. So it's very much a case of how do we target? How do we know what we're targeting? So the first thing we've done, and it's probably not big and sexy, but we're helping our local authorities. We've developed a tool that tells the local authorities in their area how much of where the carbon comes from. So does the carbon come from, Coventry, for example, I think I can remember that statistic off the top of my head, 51% of the carbon that comes from Coventry comes from journeys that start and finish within the area. Brilliant. That means that's the amount they can change. They can have an impact on that. And actually, because it's quite a small area, the walking and cycling will help a lot. You start looking at somewhere like Staffordshire, actually the majority or a huge chunk of the carbon comes from journeys that are starting and finishing outside the area, i.e. they're going up the M6. That's not something Staffordshire can, have an impact on. So what we're doing is we're developing these tools which will help the local authorities produce their policies, because they can target their policies then to see what the impact will be. DfT are getting quite excited about this. They like this. They were saying, well, can this be rolled out? Can we look at this maybe in the same way we look at things like benefit cost ratios. How do we make that carbon calculation way higher up the appraisal agenda? It's because you get a lot of national proposals say, well, actually, it's a local problem, but it's not a local problem. We've got to make sure that if we're putting out these targets, we've got to make sure that they apply to motorways, that they apply to, it's more than just the local transport. I think that's what I'm trying to say. So we need to make sure these things are all happening in collaboration together. And the sort of targets you see for electric vehicles, yes, that is going to have an impact, but you're still going to be stuck in congestion. It'll just be with electric cars. So we need to make sure that, we're doing this in conjunction with the, behavioural change and the increased capacity on the network for freight, which for rail freight, especially, I think HS2 and the sort of various programs around it, because you've got to remember, HS2 is not in isolation. We have to make all these other things happen around it so that people can get to HS2, so that people can use it. And the benefits that are coming off it, that increased capacity Lorna was talking about, how do we use it? Do we use it for local journeys, for regional journeys, for freight journeys? That's at our disposal now. That's what we can sort of play with to sort of say, how are we going to make the best use of this? So, yeah, we're looking at ways of helping local authorities determine their own priorities. We're looking at consistency across the electric vehicle infrastructure patch, so that, Dudley aren't doing something entirely different to Wolverhampton, or, Lincolnshire want to do something, but actually have they had a look what Herefordshire are up to? So it's this sort of collaboration and working across the region.
Yeah. Kevin, we've talked there really about KPIs and measuring impact, and I'm sure transport businesses very much measure, their emissions and their impact. But is the business sector more generally a little bit behind? Do you think they're taking into account their impact? Whether it's, from providing office car parks and how their staff travel into work and how they operate, as a business.
I think I think it's hard to give a broad generalization, but certainly the businesses that we work with and that I know, they do take their responsibilities seriously. The whole rise of ESG up the agenda, the corporate agenda, I think is driving a lot of this as well. And actually, when you talk to businesses, like Eddie Stobart, for example, the actual sort of fuel efficiencies of some of these big HGVs, even as diesel run, trucks, is quite surprising when you compare it to sort of the average sort of diesel car, for example. And I think what we haven't quite sort of cracked is electric vehicles right for haulage and right for freight, or is it hydrogen, for example? Just sort of put a debate there. And I think government has a responsibility there to try and lead that debate and say, actually, this is the certainty that we're aiming for, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's policy. But in terms of a lot of the developers that we work with that are doing roadside uses or supermarkets or whatever it might be, they're already putting the infrastructure in for more electric vehicles. You might not see it above ground, but it's certainly going in below ground, so that as demand increases, that it's there. So I think the private sector is trying to go along with the agenda. But it's like something that I think was still in the previous panel. It's that idea of certainty. The business needs to know which direction they're going in to be able to go faster, I suppose.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Conscious of time, I think I've got time for one more question to each of you. So, briefly in about 30 seconds, what are you most excited about? And I will start with Sarah, who starts reasonably excited, I think. So,
what am I excited about? Well, as I say, we've got this plan coming out in 2 weeks, and that's the culmination of about 2 years' work. I think the work going on, as you say, in hydrogen is quite exciting. But I think what we need to crack is land use planning, because how do we, to invest in a site, you want connectivity, but to get the transport connectivity, you need to have demand there already. So we need to get that land use planning, that sort of vicious circle broken, so that we can develop these things together.
Great. Lorna?
Yeah, so I think, this year, another big year for us, we are progressing our Western Leg Bill in Parliament. And what we're doing with the market is we're giving them that increased certainty. So I think what I'm really excited about is continuing to work with DLUC on the growth strategies across the regions for HS2 and making sure that we really optimize not only the opportunities but the investment of HS2 through new housing opportunities, regeneration of our cities and towns. I think for me that will be a big focus this year.
And Kevin, the final word.
I've just got a fire alarm going off in the background, so I'll just wait a minute. But the Friday practice, it was just, I suppose I'm excited about levelling up, actually, and the fact that, finally we have a broad commitment across government that levelling up is going to be an agenda, not just for BES or just for DLUC, but across the piece. And I think if government is serious about delivering that, and organisations like Midlands Connect and HS2 are there as sort of delivery vehicles to make that actually happen. I think that's a really exciting time to be trying to improve connectivity and improve places across the Midlands at the minute.
Great. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time, but I think we've crammed an awful lot into that half an hour. I think it's clear there's an awful lot of good work being done and things that we can get behind and really look forward to their arrival. So thank you very much, Lorna, Sarah from Midlands Connect, and Kevin for joining us this morning at Invest Midlands. Appreciate your contributions. Now, a lot of the conversation with transport and earlier future of the cities, it feels very long term. It's things that will happen in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years or so. But we've got something in Birmingham happening very soon that will be very exciting, the Birmingham 2022 Commonwealth Games. What we're going to look at in our session now really is the legacy of the Games and what will follow from once the athletes leave in the summer. So I'm delighted to welcome Ian McLeod, who's the Director for Planning, Transport and Sustainability at Birmingham City Council. Ian, thanks very much for joining us this morning.
Morning, Alex. Pleasure to be here.
Great. Just before I hand over to you for you to talk about the legacy more generally, it feels like there's a real sense of excitement building. Now we're into 2022 and it's it's actually going to be here in just a few months, and I think it is the next big sporting event, isn't it? Do you get that sense of excitement as well?
Yeah, definitely. You can feel the excitement building within the city now. A lot of the infrastructure improvements for the games are coming to an end. Alexander Stadium getting ready for hosting the trial event, obviously before the games itself, and a lot of the big transport projects are finishing off now. So there's a real sense of excitement, I think, building amongst the community as well. And it's a really great time for the city. Your previous panel talking about HS2 and some of the other big developments we've got coming forward, really positive growth agenda there, and some of the challenges around sustainability as well, which the city's trying to get at the forefront of. So yeah, it's a very exciting time for the city overall. Often talking about the golden decades, and hopefully this is the Commonwealth Games will really sort of kick that off and hopefully put Birmingham in the limelight on a global stage.
And I'm sure it will. Well, shall I hand over to you at this point and for you to talk about the legacy plans that the city has?
Sure. Thanks, Alex. I'll get my slides on there. Hopefully you can see that, Alex. Is that coming on there? Can you just tell me you can see that, Alex? Is that okay?
All good. Yes. Yep. That's
perfect. Fantastic. So obviously Birmingham 2022 in numbers, it's a huge event, 1.5 billion global spectators, a huge reach across the Commonwealth, and a real chance to showcase the region overall with events across the West Midlands. So it's not just a Birmingham event, with events taking place across the West Midlands. So over 1 million ticket sales have already been made, and really exciting time as we've talked about. So what we're obviously looking now from the games is maximising increasing the economic benefits to the city through the business and tourism program that we've got coming through, and also some of the big regeneration schemes that we've got coming forward, which have been, huge benefit to some of the local businesses, creating new employment opportunities, and ultimately we will provide thousands of new homes for the Birmingham residents as well. So we very much want the city and the objectives moving forward, obviously to deliver on the principles of a green, clean city. With a lot of activity around the Route to Zero agenda, got ambitious targets there of pushing us towards a zero carbon future by 2030 or as soon as possible thereafter. But also in terms of delivering a more inclusive city as well. And a lot of our plans are focusing on how we can bring the benefits of growth from the city centre and some of our more inner city areas where we've still got high levels of deprivation and unemployment. So the Games is very much an opportunity to help us with those objectives. Those are shared objectives with the Commonwealth Games Federation, and we're really pushing a lot of the programs and community engagement. Is trying to bring the benefit of the Games to some of the more disadvantaged communities within the city as well. So, as I said, you're talking about in a new era, green growth, high quality sports facilities. We've got thousands of new sustainable homes being built, and a big emphasis on green transport links as well. And a lot of the work we've been doing at Perry Barr that I'll talk about now is about an integrated transport system, reducing reliance on the car, and getting people with good connections into the city centre and the wider West Midlands. So this is the Perry Barr residential scheme. Obviously, the intention pre-COVID was that this would have been used as the athletes' village. Unfortunately, COVID meant with the programme, it wasn't possible to get it ready in time for the Games itself. But in many ways, the legacy of the development is still being delivered in full. So what we're doing now is going straight to legacy mode, with the houses now being fitted out for open market sale. The sale process now will begin with the first residents moving in early 2023. So you can see progress in the left on site. It's moved on even more since that photo was taken, and the end scheme there is obviously on the right as to what this will look like when it's finished. So we've got 4 plots under construction currently, and that's going to deliver nearly 1,000 new homes. We've got planning consent in the wider area for nearly a further 2,500. And the potential really, which we've taken forward through the Perry Barr 2040 master plan, is for a further up to 5,000 homes in that wider area. So the Games has really been a kickstart for the regeneration of Perry Barr, significant public sector investment of over 750 million. And I think you're going to really see that area continue to transform in the years after the Games. So we've got a number of other projects then supporting the residential, significant amendments to the highway network. We've removed the Perry Barr flyover. We're doing a lot of work at the interchange in the centre of Perry Barr. We've been capping the what was a pretty horrible subway network, public realm improvements around that. You've seen an enhanced bus interchange. A rapid transit network is being delivered by Transport for West Midlands. We've got a 2-way cycle lane, improved pedestrian and walking routes, and links up to the stadium redevelopment as well. So it's really completely transforming that area of Perry Barr. The station is nearly complete now. You can see the visual up there in the top right corner. That will be opening in the first tests of that are going to happen in May, so that will be fully operational then in time for the Games itself. We're opening also a marketing suite on what we call plot 10, which is right next to some of the apartments. Hopefully have some other pop-up uses there in terms of Games time as really maximize the opportunity of the Games itself. So this shows you the mix that we've got coming forward, apartments, townhouses. We've been working very closely with Homes England in terms of maximising affordable housing provision, and we were really pleased to get awarded some grant through the First Home Scheme, which will deliver nearly 100 first homes properties. So the scheme overall now is getting close to 30% affordable housing, and the aspiration in latter phases is to continue pushing delivery and to deliver on the policy capacity requirement of 35% overall. So you can see from the photo how well connected this is into the city centre, the significant highway works which are ongoing, and the diversion of the Aldridge Road, which is nearing completion now, and that will finish off in June in times for the Games itself. And this then is the principles really we're taking forward with the wider Peribale master plan. We really want to kick on in terms of supporting the wider regeneration of the area. You've seen a new school built, a secondary school, which is operated by Prince Albert, the Prince Albert Secondary School. That's going very well and is open now, and the first phases of pupils are coming through. The wider regeneration opportunities, and then linking those into a new local centre. So we're then sort of looking at potentially longer term, working with One Stop in terms of the regeneration and improvements of that site, and wider housing growth opportunities along the corridor. So overall, the master plan talks about the delivery of up to nearly 5,000 homes. Potential regeneration of One Stop here, the improvements to linking into the green space at Perry Hall Park, and that can provide a green connection all the way up to Alexander Stadium. So some real good growth opportunities there, and working with partners that we really want to kick on post the Games with the next phases of development. So in terms of what we've got coming forward, we're very much committed to maximising affordable housing delivery, making sure this isn't just a residential development. It needs to be supported by high quality education, improved sports facilities, getting those links into green spaces really maximised, encouraging cycling and walking, and also access to new employment opportunities as well. So for Birmingham, this is for a suburban development, has very low car parking. It's around 20% of apartments will have a car parking space. That's relatively unusual for a Birmingham type scheme, but what we're hoping here is the improvements we've made in public transport will really help the development to be successful overall. And this is Perry Park, and again, the master plan then is talking about maximising improvements to the park on the back of the redevelopment of the Alexander Stadium. We want better visitor destinations, better access for the existing community to some of the park's facilities, how we can integrate that with other existing allotments, the reservoir, canal and river, as well as making better use of a range of activities and events within that park environment. So the stadium, we really want to make that a heart of the community. We've got Birchwood Harriers operating there, UK Athletics, and there's a real chance to build activity around the stadium complex, which brings more links, more employment into the area as well. Part of the delivery of the Games involved moving a National Express bus depot. We've been working with National Express now on their new facility, but what we're looking at with the old depot now is, rather than demolishing that building, is how we can refurbish it and provide a more mixed use destination, which could be in terms of leisure, arts, culture, retail, startup activity. So we see this as a really good opportunity to provide a mixed use element to the scheme, supporting the residential development which is happening alongside the bus depot, and really maximise again further employment and creating a real destination within the Peribale scheme. And then importantly, looking beyond the sort of physical regeneration is how we can use the Games to maximise the economic benefits to the city as a whole. And, you know, what we're looking at here is Birmingham really becoming a world leader in hosting international events. So the tourism programme and the business programme supporting the Commonwealth Games, you know, is a real critical aspect of this. And we're really keen with governments and other partners to maximise that longer term economic legacy. So the Business and Tourism Programme is headed up by the West Midlands Combined Authority, who have overall responsibility for it, but again, working closely with government and partners I mentioned. This is really about really maximising investment into the city, benefiting from the Games as the host city itself. And we've got a whole programme of activity which we're delivering with these partners overall to really get those economic benefits coming through. So these are the objectives of the program overall. Enhance tourism, increasing trade links, looking to maximise foreign direct investment. The city's been very successful in attracting FDI from across the globe, but obviously the links with the Commonwealth, countries like Australia, Canada, India, Malaysia, Singapore. We're looking to develop those links, encourage further investment, and obviously increase trade on the back of the games itself. So the trade program then focuses on a number of key sectors: data, future mobility, creative technology, education, the sports economy, business, and also obviously food and drink. So some big opportunities there for us to develop links with countries within the Commonwealth. We have UK House, which is being set up for the 12 days of activities being planned for the Games. That will really be a focus for this business engagement, meeting investors, and we're trying to really generate activity within the city. So to do that and to complement that work, we're looking at launching our investment prospectus for Birmingham, which will sit alongside a lot of the activities at UK House to try and really generate further investment opportunities. So this is moving us on from the big city plan that we adopted in 2010, really trying to maximise and promote some of the investment opportunities in the city, and whether that's potential regeneration of areas like Millennium Point, growth opportunities in Digbeth. We have huge opportunities at Arden Cross and the interchange site where the City Council is a major landowner, and Peddymore, which can be a major employment scheme with nearly 70 hectares of commercial land available there for new B1, B2, B8 investment. And then UK House is going to be focused on the exchange, which has been, really a great redevelopment, refurbishment by the University of Birmingham. It's a fantastic asset to the city, right within the city core. And this, as I said, will be a focus for the business and investment engagement. So this is a type of program of what we're going to be hosting during the day. Significant UK businesses, sector delegates, for whom to get ministers up for obviously the program of events itself, the media, athletes. So really trying to maximize that economic benefit and, getting as much activity, commercial activity and new investment into the city and the wider region on the back of the Games. And as I said, as we started off the conversation, we really see this as a golden decade for Birmingham. And, the objective obviously to be bold, to be Birmingham, and to push the vision for the city now over the next 10 years. Okay, Alex, that's the end of the presentation. Happy to take any questions.
No, that was great. Thank you very much, Ian, for giving us that overview. And I think what's clear is the kind of breadth and depth of work that's going on. I suppose what's really impressive is the challenges that the Birmingham's overcome. So they had shortened timescales because they were awarded the Games late, and then COVID. It's a really huge achievement, I think, for the city and all the partners involved to be in the position that we're in with a few months to go. How proud are you of how everybody's responded to the challenges?
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible, really, how the city has been able to deliver. And I think there's a lot of credit to all the team that's worked on the delivery of the Games. We had a very short time frame in terms of delivering the Games. Came to the city sort of stepping in. We'd already, as you're probably aware, Alex, been looking at 2026. That was then accelerated to 2022, and pretty much everything's been thrown at it. Then, the first pandemic for a long time, which has meant huge challenges in terms of some of the construction sites. I think sensible decisions were made on the Athletes Village, in terms of using existing student accommodation to help meet that need. But the fact that some of the big construction programs, the Alex redevelopment, the swimming pool in Sandwell, that those are all going to be complete and operational. A lot of the infrastructure work which has been going on, and you see the progress made in Perry Bar with the residential scheme itself, which is really coming together well now. The first apartments coming through for sale in early 2023. It's a massive achievement overall. So I think there's a lot for the city to be proud of, and hopefully now a time in the summer that we can enjoy the Games itself, and it's a big moment for the city overall. So yeah, massive credit for those who've worked on it.
Yeah, I think it is going to be a real milestone. I think what's interesting with Birmingham is how it's developed its confidence. Probably since about 2015 and Grand Central, kick-started, sort of city centre development, and we've seen plenty of other things follow. But that's helped build up the city's confidence that it can deliver and succeed. But this gives it a real international platform to shout about its ability to deliver. So, how important do you think that'll be for all of those future conversations, whether with inward investors, developers, or other people who want to partner with the city?
Yeah, I think that's massive, the massive point you're making now. I mean, Birmingham's been great at attracting FDI. The regeneration of the city centre has been really gathering pace now over the last 5-10 years. We've seen with Paradise Circus, we've got Smithfield coming forward. Some massive opportunities there to really kick on with HS2 as well. So there's a huge opportunities there for the city. But as you said, Alex, this takes Birmingham onto a global level. The reach of the Commonwealth Games is still massive. You're accessing an audience of north of 1 billion people. So huge opportunity there to promote the city on an international level. And I think that in itself will hopefully really enable us to kick on some of the big regeneration opportunities we've got coming forward, and really trying to meet some of the challenges as well around inclusive growth and pushing the green regeneration of the city as well. So yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really good time for us, and it will build on a lot of the good work that's been done over the last 5 to 10 years in terms of the regeneration of the city core and how we can bring that out into the suburbs.
And at our Invest North conference earlier this month, we had Howard Bernstein from Manchester City Council talking about sort of the progress over a generation Eastlands in Manchester from which started with the Commonwealth Games for them. How do you see, I suppose, the next generation playing out? Do you expect the Commonwealth Games to be a real catalyst for waves of future investment?
Yeah, definitely. I think, Perry Bar, I talked there about, 1,000 homes on site, but the opportunity is up to 5,000 overall. So I think, you've got sites there with planning consent, the opportunity for investors to come in and immediately pretty much kick on from where we are now. So, there's plots there that we'll be taking to the market and looking for investment immediately. So I think that area of Birmingham, with the investment that's gone in at the Alex, nearly 750 million being invested into that Perry Bar area overall. I mean, that's going to be a massive opportunity to kick on the regeneration of that part of the city. And I think, as you said then, with the opportunities elsewhere in terms of we've got some significant redevelopment opportunities coming forward within the city core, but also in suburban areas as well. It talks about the Arden Cross, NEC, with the city and major landowners, some real opportunities there to attract investment in, and to kick on that regeneration story for the city over the next generations. And we're keen, obviously, now to maximise that. We've got the investment prospectus. We're launching a new strategy for the city centre later this year through the Future City Plan, which will be the city centre master plan that will replace the big city plan. And we're also reviewing the Birmingham development plan as well. So we're really trying to maximise that growth story now.
And I suppose one of the bigger changes from 2010 to now is the sustainability agenda, and just how very important that is now. And I know it's very much embedded into the Commonwealth Games, whether it's the partnership with Severn Trent and the new forest plans, and as well as how the Games is delivered all round. How are you looking to use what the Games is going to achieve on a sustainability front to encourage all other projects that are coming forward in the city?
Yeah, and there's a lot of synergy there, as I talked about with the work we're doing on Route to Zero. We've got a massively ambitious agenda on Route to Zero. We've got a number of projects being delivered currently. You've got the first hydrogen buses on the network, and those will be used for the Games as well. We're rolling out electric charging points across the city, and again, that's supporting aspirations for the Games. You talked about the green agenda, with tree planting. We've got the Future Parks Accelerator program, which is looking at improving the green infrastructure overall. Some really exciting work going on with national trusts around how we can really maximise our green assets and improve access to green space within that city core as well. Now, all builds back to the Commonwealth Games objectives, of getting people, healthier, more active, and with some of those deprived communities, it's getting those benefits through to those residents. So there's a lot of shared endeavour there, and you talked there about the tree planting initiatives, but also improvements to green spaces and access to that. Encouraging people to be healthy and less reliance on the car. Those are all very much shared endeavours, and the Games will very much sort of support us on that. And the legacy plan we've got for the Commonwealth Games really builds on those objectives as well.
And in this session, we seem to have talked about sort of everything other than the athletics. So just to finish off, in terms of the couple of weeks of the Games itself, what are you most looking forward to seeing?
I think it's going to be fantastic to see that range of sporting activity taking place. I think it'll be great to see the Alex, fully operating, and to see the athletics at the Alex. But it's going to be fantastic overall, isn't it? There's going to be so many great sporting activities, whether it's the hockey, the netball, or whatever sport you're interested in. The cricket at Edgbaston. It's going to be a whole range of stuff there. So there's so much to look forward to. I think when the Games actually arrives, it's going to be a great couple of weeks for Birmingham.
It really is. I think a real celebration for the city. Well, thank you very much, Ian, for joining us and taking us through that. I think, as you said at the start, the excitement's really starting to build, and I think, from what you've talked through there, that excitement isn't about this summer. It's about, the next 10 years and beyond for the city. So, good luck in continuing to deliver that, and thank you for joining us this morning.
Pleasure to be here, Alex. Thanks ever so much.
Thank you. And in the words of one presenter, now for something completely different, but also still within our place theme. We're going to take a look at Proptech. That's a theme that has wide applicability. I suppose at its heart, it's about facilitating unique workplace experiences, offering advanced data and analytics capabilities for real-time feedback, and even helping property teams purchase, sell, and manage their assets. It's about everything about owning, leasing, or working in a building and making that easier and more efficient. To talk us through what Proptech means and how it can help power Midlands development, I'm delighted to welcome our panelist, Tom Huffsmith, Project Manager at Conigar, responsible for the Island Quarter in Nottingham, and John Holly, Investment Director at Watkin Jones. Thank you both for joining us this morning at Invest Midlands. If I could kick off, as my brief introduction touched on, Proptech can mean an awful lot of things. So, in the work that you're doing, and I'll start with you, Tom. What does Proptech mean in a sort of pragmatic day-to-day sense?
I think it means opportunity, because the built environment is the second least digitalized industry in the world, and I think agriculture and hunting are first. So I don't think we're in danger of becoming the least digitized, but it's quite important. We've never had more pressures on us for information across everything we do. Our entire ecosystem is sort of under pressure from demands for information, design, construction, delivery, and operations. I think to begin with, we are spending a lot more time on technology and helping us with our demand analytics, and drilling back down into exactly what the office and the workplace and the living place will look in the future. And it's difficult now because we're still in the post-COVID, or at least in a lull in COVID period. But we are relying a lot more on analytics to understand our market segments more deeply, what their preferences are, what they're looking for, et cetera. We're also trying to understand more the age groups that we're designing for. We're a large project, we're mixed use. So melding that all together is quite important. So we spend a lot more time just on the analytics of our demand, the types of products and services and facilities we need to offer, and how those all come about. A side point on that, cars, parking. it's a bit of a conundrum. And as I move around the UK myself, and it's the same to a degree in the US, there seem to be two minds on cars and parking. Certainly in center cities, we would like to see less. By the same token, we need to make sure that we're addressing demand. So I think in terms of demand and the specifications from our customers, it's quite important that we keep developing our technology that gives us that online, that real-time understanding of what our customers are looking for, the end users. In terms of technology, I guess my only comment is I'm not a BIM expert, but it would be, I think, helpful to see, and I'm hoping to see, just from my own standpoint, BIM technology that's available to one-off developers, home builders in the future, and so that it can go beyond a tool that's used just for large projects. It can be made affordable for anyone in the built environment, and that includes managing post-construction.
Great, thank you for that, Tom. John, welcome. What does Proptech mean at Watkin Jones and for your sort of day-to-day work?
Absolutely. So Watkin Jones, as a bit of background, we're the UK's largest developer of residential for rent. So our focus is principally on how people live and developing great homes for people to live in. So, I suppose I have quite a useful position to talk about Proptech holistically, because we have access to most points in the property life cycle. So, from a project's inception, we use Proptech tools like Land Insight and Realise to identify sites. So there's some quite clever tools out there which allow us to identify potential development opportunities. Savills have a data insight team who can identify lease events for office buildings that perhaps are suitable for refurbishment into residential. Then with our due diligence, we mentioned Realise previously, but we do a lot of research into demographics. So who the target demographic for our projects is, because as Tom sort of mentioned, a focus on putting the resident first is really quite a big focus for us as a business. Then financial appraisal, there's some quite clever software out there at the moment. One particular name that I'm really fond of is Preo. So they're some quite effectively mobile software which can allow you to make investment decisions fairly quickly and do it on the move. We also build all of our buildings in-house, so we have the ability to access Contech, which is more sort of from a sort of construction technology perspective, so allowing us to build efficiently and pass on hopefully some savings to future residents. Then we also have an operational brand that's called Fresh, who are probably best known for their presence in student accommodation. So they operate over 22,000 units across the UK. So using Proptech systems like Yardi to efficiently manage those buildings is really important to us. It allows us to create homes that the residents really love to live in, that they're very well managed. It also allows us to operate them efficiently. So from a sort of energy usage perspective, there's some quite clever technology out there, like there's a brand called Utopy, who allow you to effectively smart meter each room to reduce your carbon footprint, which so really, we sort of use Proptech for a lot of different uses, but in terms of defining what Proptech is, it's sort of all encompassing, and we use it day to day fairly regularly. So I think quite excited to talk about this today.
Yeah, no, that was a great quick overview of some of the different ways and times that it's particularly useful. Well, one of the themes that's come through very strongly already today at the conference, and I think will continue to, is sustainability. So with that such an important political and business priority, how is technology and data playing a part in decarbonising our built environment? Tom, can I pass that to you?
Sure. We are actually building our own platform, our own technology platform to help us manage sustainability and energy, because we're not sure that any of the systems out there work for a project like ours in a mixed use environment. So we're not back to the drawing board, but we are looking at our own framework to technology framework to help us manage. And frankly, we've learned that a lot of the large developers and contractors are considering doing the same thing. We need that technology to help us measure in real time the choices we're making on site, to archive the decisions we're making, and then be able to transparently report them back to lenders and investors. And there's increasing demand to do that. All the decisions, in my view, that are made during the design phase and construction, but more the design phase going forward on almost every piece of a building will be up for scrutiny in the future by lenders and investors. So we're creating systems that will help us manage all that. Some of our contractors, we have sort of 3 or 4 of the tier 1 contractors on site. They have various systems that can tell us in real time what the carbon footprint of different material selections and systems are. I think, but part and parcel with that, we are trying to build, as part of our system, a better way to communicate within the teams. And it's not that we're not coordinated, but our teams have acted in traditional ways going forward. So we're trying to figure out a way to have more collaboration within the teams on the decisions that are made, because there are so many knock-on effects. I have to say, just as an aside, that it's been interesting as we interview lots of different contractors, mechanical, electrical, structural, et cetera, for the different phases of our project. And there are still a lot of professionals in the market who are very good at what they do, but they are hesitant or afraid to look non-commercial when they discuss or even propose things that fit the sustainability and carbon neutral agenda. So I think part and parcel with all this is a massive amount of technology to educate even our colleagues in this industry on why we need to be sustainable, and also honor social and governance, emerging social and governance requirements and things we should be doing, and then the value of that, so we can move away from hesitancy. I'm not going to propose a gray water system because that's something that only green people do. Well, we have to move beyond that quickly and make sure that we're using technology to educate our colleagues across the industry.
Yeah, and I find that that you're creating your own platform and made that big commitment. Really interesting. Was that a difficult decision to make? Because I assume there's plenty of cost involved, or is I suppose that clarity on outcomes and why it is really important?
It was a little bit. I obviously have a foreign accent, and I've worked a lot in the U.S. And in some ways, the U.S. is behind the U.K. and in other ways ahead. One of the areas where they are ahead are in the certification programs. And this is not a knock on any of the certification programs in the UK. But in the US and most urban markets, it's unlikely that anyone will rent without asking, what's the LEED certification? It's almost an upfront question before you even go look at a building. In the UK, we're slowly getting there. But to answer your question, the reason we are going to our own system is because the certification and the transparency needs to be prepared and then communicated to all stakeholders. It's not just the end users and the tenants. It is to government, it is to our lenders and investors, et cetera, and our employees. But we didn't think that any of the systems really did that. And we didn't think that also the systems in place outside of the US, and this is maybe just more leads, look at post-construction and ongoing sustainability. So we wanted a more comprehensive system. We also wanted something that also included operating expenses. And we saw this sort of in our first phase where we have lots of presentations. We have really wonderful consultants on our project that we've selected out of large fields. But they would propose things that cost a lot in terms of CapEx and the project cost, but had a quick payback. But those decisions weren't being fully considered in a balanced way by the teams. So it was adding in that long-term holistic view and then making sure we had something that was really clear that we could transparently convey to particularly end users. So that's really what drove it.
Okay, no, that's fascinating to hear the rationale. John, in terms of your work, how are you seeing the impact of sustainability, and how are you looking to manage that in the future?
Sure. So, from a pure bricks and mortar perspective, we're quite forward thinking in terms of, our net zero targets. So in order to realize those, we've, in almost all of our new buildings, we're including a technology like air source heat pumps, photovoltaics, which is slightly less new to the construction sector. We also now meter every single room in all of our developments. The reason being that we've learned that from both a sort of pure economic perspective and from a resident satisfaction perspective, carbon usage is incredibly important to them. We've surveyed a sample of our tenants and worked out that the modern tenant does really care about their impact on the planet. Going back to sort of the economic point, I suppose with what's going on in the world at the moment, reliance on fossil fuels is something that I think has come under sort of acute scrutiny from us as a business. So I think actually decarbonisation is not only the right thing to do for the planet, but also the right thing to do financially as well often. So I think going forward, we're certainly using a lot of technology to try and reduce our footprint on the planet and reliance on fossil fuels. One interesting, I suppose, avenue that we're progressing at the moment. So a lot of my job is identifying new sites. Historically, I suppose, as a business and as an industry, a nice cleared vacant site is often cheaper and easier to deliver for a developer. However, I think with sort of recent research on the embedded carbon within most standing buildings, we're finding technology quite a useful tool to identify vacant buildings, so that perhaps live beyond their suitable lifetime, that we can redevelop into more sustainable buildings. The carbon impact of redevelopment is a lot less than building from the ground up. So we've got a few projects on at the moment where we've used some clever software to identify lease events that's from the Savills data insight team, who effectively we identify buildings that we can refurbish, which is a lot greener overall. So I think that's quite an interesting trend that we'll see happen more and more going forwards.
I suppose is that trend meaning that the sustainability, I suppose, KPI or metric is starting to balance out kind of the pure economic metrics?
Absolutely, yeah. So I think our model will often be to seek institutional forward funding. So a lot of the investors have quite a binary approach to ESG, where it's less sort of an impact on value of the building. It's more a binary decision for them as to whether they can or can't invest in a project. So I think that's a really positive move for the development industry, because it means that I suppose ESG and sustainability isn't a choice; it's an obligation. If you want to sort of exist in the current development climate, you have to have strong sustainability credentials, which, from a personal perspective, I'm really supportive of.
Alex, if I could just interject just piggyback on that part. I think something that will help us as an industry is figure out who's going to foot the bill, because we're going into a massive energy transition here. And it can't all fall on the developer or the owner, et cetera. There's so many stakeholders now. And my expectation is that we will use technology to measure results as it's been done elsewhere. LEED certified buildings are typically have 20 to 30% energy savings over traditional buildings, et cetera. So the more data we have, we can start to show end users the benefit of renting or owning, a flat, et cetera, that's certified, and then we can prove to the financial markets the savings. And while there are the most recent studies I can find are 2018 studies, so it's all recent data on things like cap rates and discount rates. So all to say, I think is now that this is ramping up so quickly, I'm hoping that we can use technology to measure energy usage, consumption, go back and evaluate decisions that were made during design to see what really paid off and what didn't, so that we can start to say, all right, we're a green building, we expect a better discount rate, we expect a better coupon on our loan, etc.
And I suppose innovation's meant to be exciting. It's meant to make us feel, optimistic and positive about the future. So, John, what are some of the, I suppose, the exciting ways that you're seeing, whether it's developers, owners, or operators, use Proptech, and particularly sort of, I suppose, jumping forward, a few years, what's the direction of travel that you're most excited about?
Yeah, so I suppose from my perspective, I sit in a role that is very much at the spearhead of identifying locations that would potentially work for residential rent. So at the very front end, we like to consider ourselves fairly smart at identifying sites that will work. So we use tools like Realize, which sort of overlays planning, demographic, and rental data. So it allows us to create projects that are importantly financially viable for us as a business, and ultimately will be great places to live. I think Tom's mentioned a really important point. So as a business, sort of the cross spectrum of us, we obviously work through planning and ultimately through operation through our business Fresh. So putting the sort of resident first approach to pretty much everything we do is really important to us. Proptech specifically allows you to get real live feedback data from residents. So what we're really trying to do is sort of close the loop through our operating arm to say, what does the resident really want, and what is the most efficient way of operating a building? And we can design that into the very first stage, which is site identification. So how we do that is using useful tools like Yardi, which is sort of operational software, which allows real-time feedback from residents. I suppose from a sort of more holistic picture, we do use this software, which I've mentioned previously, which is provided by Savills Data and Insight team. So there's a chap there called Tom Slater, who's come up with quite a clever tool which overlays land insight data with lease events. So ultimately, in identifying, I suppose, redevelopment opportunities, that software is really, really useful for us. So I think that's really quite useful, sort of seeing repurposing of buildings that perhaps are no longer fit for purpose into something that people really want. So we see ourselves as part of the solution to the housing crisis. So using any kind of software that helps us to alleviate that housing pressure is I think a really exciting prospect for us.
No, absolutely. And Tom, what are some of the exciting innovations that you're seeing?
One of the more interesting things, I think, is training for employees and construction workers. So we are building an online platform to bring employees both with our contractors and with our operating company, because we'll operate everything except John's colleagues at Fresh will be managing our student accommodation. So we're building a program for mentoring and training employees, and we're offering that to our contractors. Also within our operating team, we're using that system. And I'm I come from the hotel industry, and I've seen sort of state-of-the-art hotel stuff. I think ours will be very helpful. It's just one anecdotal example, but I think it's apropos. We're about to open a building that has multiple restaurants and event space in it, and we're spending time. When the cooks leave the kitchen, they leave the burners on all night to keep the pizza oven going, or they leave them on during the day. So we've been training them, showing them the cost of that energy usage and what it means in terms of having to heat the building, etc. And voila, just a simple thing, a simple training thing is reducing our bills because they all get it. So it's simple things like that. It's the other thing that we're doing. We're building an app. This is not a new concept, but we are building an app, and even John Fresh will be part of this. That will tie in all of our end users on site, because we'll have residences, we'll have quite a large office and life science park, etc. And we'll start tying them in together so they can be aware of of things like green events that we're sponsoring, social events, etc. So because if I could rename sustainability and use a different term, I would. It's sort of like, Miss America contest. What do you wish for? World peace and sustainability. But people really don't understand it. And there are other components of that go missing. And one of those is well-being, et cetera, for the end user. So we are building quite a few online platforms for our end users, be they restaurant guests or tenants, to promote their well-being and world peace.
Well, we perhaps start tackling the things that are achievable first. Yeah. Then, are there areas, Tom, where you think technology isn't as embedded as perhaps it should be, or there's ripe opportunities ripe?
I go back to one thing John's talked about, the monitoring systems for water usage, energy usage, load sharing. I think going forward, any type of building will be heavily monitored to help with energy usage. Hotel rooms have had for decades sensors when guests leave rooms, turns off the HVAC. That's old tech. That's so 2015. I think we're going to see a whole new wave of technology that's affordable. It needs to be affordable for any type of building. It doesn't need to be affordable just for luxury residences. And I think that's going to help and bring more awareness across our managed estate. So I think that will be helpful. I think figuring out how to create transparency with all this work that now all of us on the phone will be doing to create sustainable buildings and platforms. I think technology is going to help us figure out a way to explain beyond world peace what exactly what we're doing that's sustainable and why it's important.
John, where do you see some of the unfulfilled opportunities?
So I'm sort of probably going to take a similar stance to Tom, that quite ambitious in its nature and quite macro, but something that I've certainly identified that is sort of an ongoing trend is that I think there's a move generally in society towards sharing, because people realise that sharing is sustainable. Sharing is also economically more viable. There's a lot of pressure on the housing market in the UK, and the ability to share some of the cost of, I suppose, some of the wider costs, particularly energy usage, is an incredibly efficient way to live. So I think I'd anticipate seeing more technology arise that allows you to share conveniently. I think historically, home ownership in the UK has been sort of very much promoted by central government and by society generally. I think there's probably, certainly my peers and perhaps the younger generation identified that not only sharing quite fun, but it's also incredibly economical, and also the impact on the planet of something that is shared is significantly less than something that is sort of owned individually. So I suspect that sort of trend will continue going forwards, and I think the more smart technology that we can sort of implement to make that easy, I think the better from my perspective.
Yeah, and how much are you seeing being driven by, I suppose, that younger generation, which I suspect, John, you're a part of? How is that accelerating what developers, owners, landlords are needing to provide?
So yeah, I think the interesting thing is that the property development industry and property in general is perhaps has had too much of a focus on what investors want and what the money wants. But I think there is definitely a sort of sea change where the resident is being put first. From our perspective, we have access to 22,000 student users who will be the occupiers for the build to rent and co-living sectors going forward. So we do take a lot of learnings from them, because they do want to live slightly differently to the way that perhaps the older generations have in the past. So I think it's become incredibly important to us. We do spend a lot of time sort of future gazing. So we've been through an exercise last year where we looked at the three sectors we work in. student accommodation, co-living and build to rent, and really asked the residents what they want, which resulted in some quite interesting sort of emergencies from our perspective, specifically in terms of spatial programming. So asking residents what they actually want to use different parts of their building for, which I suppose it allows us hopefully to create buildings that are really usable day to day. So yeah, I think it is really, really important for both us and the investment sector to recognise that actually the tenant is what drives this being a great place to live. So putting them at the front of every decision is really, really important.
And Tom, what changes are you expecting to see from the demands from this next generation, and them being very tech savvy?
They are, and there's a great study out that Deloitte did. I think they've done 2 in the last couple of years, one just recently, and we, on the one hand, I think right now it's all about Gen Z. That's who we're designing for, and sustainable and ethical standards. Their requirements are the standard. I almost think we should just jump to that. It doesn't mean that other demographics aren't important. There are tons of people turning 65 every day in the Western world, but I think we're designing for Gen Z, and I think they're they are really going to be driving a lot of what we build in the next 15, 20 years while we're going through this energy transition. Everything from the way they drive. I agree, John, with shared things. We've even looked at shared load sharing distributed heat for neighborhoods. Why can't a neighborhood with 15, 20 homes, load share? Would that be a model that could ever be adopted in the UK? So I think that's at least for me, that's where that's sort of the major lens that we look through right now.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, I think unfortunately we're just about out of time. So very much appreciate Tom and John you sharing your perspectives on Proptech and the broader property sector. I think there is plenty for us to look forward to. I think it'll be really interesting how the Gen Z population and others really help accelerate change. I think that fits in nicely with what we've heard throughout the place pillar this morning, from the Future of Cities conversation at the start, talking about our transport priorities and Birmingham 2022. Those messages around sustainability and optimism have come through very strongly. So thank you both for your contributions. And as I said, that wraps it up for our place pillar. Just about getting underway on the blue stage is Rob Darby from 200 Degrees, talking about his investment journey, which is a fascinating story that he has to tell. And then we will be back on the pink stage at 12 o'clock with the start of the War for Talent session. So I hope you're able to join either or both of those. And I will also hopefully see you later on in the day when I'm back here for the international pillar. So hope you enjoy Invest Midlands and thank you for joining us.